Hello and welcome. When Anne Brontë left Thorp Green Hall in the summer of 1845, she likely thought she was stepping away from one part of her life, leaving the household and its dramas behind. But what really happened to the family she'd been a governess for and worked so closely with? Thorp Green was far from ordinary. It was a house where her brother, Branwell, as we know, had briefly worked as a tutor, only to leave under a cloud of scandal and mystery, and where Anne herself made that quiet but deliberate choice to resign. Was it loyalty that made her go, or simply the impossibility of remaining in a home that was overshadowed by gossip and scandal? Perhaps she saw guidance and comfort here at Holy Trinity in Little Ouseburn, the church she would have attended on a regular basis whilst being a governess at the hall. Was she praying for wisdom and strength in a situation that must have been weighing heavily on her mind? What followed for the family was a series of events that might seem almost like they've stepped out of a novel themselves. Unexpected marriages, secret romances, and tragedies that reshaped their lives forever. Who found happiness? Who was caught in a scandal? And how might our dear Anne Brontë have felt as she watched from afar, receiving letters that revealed a household that was completely unravelling? Stay tuned, because their story is full of surprises and it raises questions and really hard not to wonder about. How much did one scandal ripple through an entire family? Could love and loyalty survive the pressures of society and circumstances? And how does a household of seemingly ordinary people become a story worthy of a Brontë novel? So, as I said, I'm here at Holy Trinity Church in Little Ouseburn. It's a pretty chilly morning today, hence why I've got a scarf on. It feels like a very big step in that I'm heading into the woolly season. You know, it's the first time I've worn a scarf this autumn. So yeah, it's a slippery slope now. Before you know it will be gloves, and I must admit my hands are already cold. But it's a strange morning today, but I am wrapped up. The carrier bag is here to sit on to keep my bottom warm. And we're going to explore this beautiful, and I mean beautiful, church. Some churches you go to and they're kind of very much the same. Not this one. For instance, I'm going to show you this behind me, and the church is just behind this tree here. It is really wonderful, and I often get to speak to the people that keep these places going, whether it be the vicar, the church wardens, or just the volunteers that come in day after day. And I've spoken to, so far, the church warden and a volunteer, and they have been so welcoming and wonderful, told me so much information about this small little place in Yorkshire. So hopefully we will have a good wander round. We might put the wellies on because it's quite wet underfoot, and I will take you round and I will show you where Anne Brontë herself probably spent a lot of time thinking about what she should do for her future and for Branwell. Anne Brontë had been a governess to the Robinson children for 5 years. She looked after Lydia, Elizabeth, Mary, and for a while young Edmund Jr. at Thorp Green Hall near York. She left in the summer of 1845, around the time her brother Branwell Brontë, who'd been tutoring Edmund, was dismissed from his post. The two Brontës departed under very different circumstances. One, quietly, the other amidst absolute scandal and gossip, leaving that poor household altered forever. Not long after they had gone, the calm of Thorp Green was broken yet again, but this time by tragedy. On the 26th of May 1846, the children's father, Reverend Edmund Robinson, died at the age of 46. Now, I always think of him as a very old man, but actually he was only 46. His obituary described him as dying in firm and humble trust in his Saviour, and he was buried here at Little Ouseburn, the parish church just a few miles from Thorp Green, where Anne herself would have once attended services with the family. His death left Mrs. Lydia Robinson, now 45, in charge of the estate and the 4 surviving children. So Lydia was 20, Elizabeth 19, Mary 17, and Edmund Jr. was only 14. There'd been another daughter, little Georgiana, but she died in infancy in 1841, aged just 3. Parish records don't tell us much about her death, but childhood illness was so common and obviously heartbreaking, so it kind of isn't a surprise. Managing Thorp Green without her husband proved far from easy. The estate, with its farmland, its tenants, household staff, it all required careful attention and financial oversight. Surviving records and letters suggested that poor Mrs. Robinson really struggled with both that day-to-day maintenance and the income of the property. By November 1846, this is only 6 months after her husband's death, the family left the house. But rather than sell Thorp Green, they decided to rent it out. So they placed an advertisement for a tenant in the York Herald in early 1847. They offered the mansion, its gardens, its stables and extensive game rights, whilst also liquidating some of their farming stock and equipment in local sales. This move allowed them to maintain some income from, obviously, the property and manage their affairs, and of course stepping away from their house, which they'd called home. After leaving Thorp Green, Mrs. Robinson and her children stayed for a while with relatives, moving around, getting to know people, trying to find their footing after the death of Reverend Robinson. But before long, they made their way to Great Bar Hall near Birmingham, home of Sir Edward Dolman Scott. What a great name. And his wife. By the summer of 1848, Lydia and her family were actually living there. And at some point, she and Sir Edward kind of grew close. Then in the August the same year, Lady Scott died after what was said to be a very long and horrible illness. Only a few months later, in the November of 1848, Lydia married Sir Edward, becoming the new Lady Scott. It must have turned heads. I mean, even amongst their friends, there must have been questions. Charlotte Brontë, who had seen the Robinson girls' letters to Anne, wrote rather sharply that their mother does not care in the least what becomes of them. She is only anxious to get them husbands of any kind, that they may be off her hands, and that she may be free to marry Sir E. Scott. Charlotte went further still, calling her a worst mother, a worst woman I believe hardly exists. I mean, that was harsh, though you can kind of understand why Charlotte felt bitter after seeing poor Branwell going through all that heartache. But in fairness to Lydia, a widow in her position with 4 children, an estate to manage, and little financial independence, didn't really have many options. Marriage offered security and stability, even if her timing did kind of raise eyebrows. I mean, we don't know exactly why Lydia and Sir Edward married so quickly, but it must have looked questionable to others. I mean, Lady Scott, the first, had only died 3 months before, and Lydia's own husband had only been dead 2.5 years. She'd only been at Great Bar Hall that summer, and yet before the year was out, she was mistress of the house and had a title. While Lydia was settling into this very nice new lifestyle, her children's futures were beginning to take their own dramatic twists and turns. We've got scandal, we've got elopement, and we've got unexpected marriages. I mean, they were all just around the corner waiting to happen. And yes, they would keep the Robinsons' name in the headlines for, many years to come. Before her father's death, Lydia Robinson, the eldest daughter, had already caused quite a stir. On October the 20th, 1845, at just 20 years old, she made a bold move and eloped with Henry Roxby, an actor from a well-known theatrical family. They married at Gretna Green, which was the go-to spot for couples wanting a quick but legal marriage without parental consent. Henry was about 25 at the time, a few years older than Lydia, and very much a man of the stage. He belonged to the Roxby-Beverley acting dynasty. Henry carved out a career as a low comedian. It's not very flattering, is it? Performing in theatres across northern England and in productions like Oliver Twist and Jack Sheppard. He even took on a stint managing the Victoria Theatre in London, showing that he did have ambition and some skill behind the scenes. How long Lydia and Henry had been seeing each other before they obviously eloped, we really don't know. I mean, there was so much secrecy and obviously suddenness of it all. It makes it seem like it must have been a passionate, wild, whirlwind affair. Certainly not something widely discussed amongst their friends and their family. The elopement was scandalous, especially as Lydia was underage. Her father, poor man, understandably, was furious. And in January 1846, just a few months later, Reverend Robinson rewrote his will, cutting Lydia completely out and distributing her portion to her siblings. After their marriage, Lydia and Henry settled in Scarborough, though life was far from easy. I mean, being disinherited left them with financial struggles. And while Henry did continue to support by, performing and doing what he needed, they were by no means wealthy. It's likely there were times when making ends meet was challenging, giving Lydia a very different life from that very genteel upbringing she'd known at Thorp Green. Despite the early hardships, Lydia and Henry had 2 sons. And interestingly, after Lydia's brother Edmund passed away, he left part of his estate to Lydia and her children, suggesting that those family connections hadn't been completely severed. It's a very bizarre place where I'm sat, because behind me are all the old higgledy-piggledy greystones, all at wobbly angles. But behind the camera are rows and rows of more modern graves, and they're all facing me. I'm sat on this bench, and there's a bit of a gap, and then all these modern, and I feel like I'm sort of stood at the front of a hall or something, and that they're all listening. So, yeah, very bizarre. It's, I don't know. Not a bad thing. No, I'm happy to entertain the people here. Anyway, let's get on. Elizabeth, known affectionately as Bessie, was the second daughter of Reverend Edmund and Lydia Robinson. Even though she was younger than Lydia, Betsy had a sort of a spirit of her own, you could say. And it wasn't long before her actions would make waves in the family and the local community. Her biggest scandal came in the mid-1840s after her father had passed away in 1846. Bessie became involved with a man named Mr. Milner. The nature of their relationship caused quite a stir when she refused to marry him. He threatened to publish her private letters in the York press and even considered suing her for breach of promise. Harsh. The Robinson family stepped in to protect her reputation, like you would, reportedly paying him £150 to stay silent. I mean, that's a significant sum. It's roughly about £15,000 in today's money. I mean, that gives us some idea of how serious the threat was. We don't know a great deal about this Mr. Milner. His occupation isn't clearly recorded, but his behaviour and threats suggest he was determined to use the situation to his advantage. Bessie's refusal and the family's intervention show how carefully reputations had to be managed in this Victorian society, especially for young women. Did Bessie find out he was only after her inheritance and broke off their engagement, hence why he came after her for money? If so, yeah, well done, Bessie. I mean, despite this drama, Bessie eventually married a man called William Jessup, who came from Butterley Hall in Ripley in Derbyshire. I mean, Jessup was a man of property, a factory owner, and marrying him would have been seen as a respectable match, sort of aligning with the social expectations of the time. Charlotte Bronte's letters suggest that Bessie was not necessarily in love. One sister acts according to her mother's wish, but the marriage offered security and stability after the upheaval of her early adult years. After her marriage, Bessie lived a quiet life. We don't have records of her having children, and she seemed to have withdrawn from public scrutiny, perhaps content to live more privately after the scandal of her youth. Her story is a reminder of how Victorian women had to navigate society's pressures, family expectations, and the consequences of stepping outside accepted norms, all whilst carving out a sense of independence and security for themselves. I can hear some bells, not from the church, from over there. It's midday. Mary, the youngest of the Robinsons' daughter, was known for her lively and flirtatious nature. She had a quick mind, a playful spirit, and a tendency to change her mind about suitors, which must have kept her family on their toes. In the October of 1848, just a few weeks before her mother Lydia married Sir Edward Scott, Mary herself was married to Henry Clapham. It was what Charlotte Brontë described as a low match for her. Gosh, this is so Charlotte. And Mary herself seemed to have felt the disparity, later complaining to Anne that Henry had misrepresented his wealth and social connections. Oh dear. Even so, she embraced her new role as Mrs. Clapham and made quite an impression in Keighley. Charlotte noted that Mary was cutting a prodigious dash, suggesting she had a flair for style and presentation, perhaps using it to assert her independence and confidence in a new life. Mary and Henry went on to have children, including a daughter, though details of their family life are quite scarce. It seems she settled into this role as a mother and a wife, navigating those social expectations placed on her whilst kind of keeping a spark of her lively personality. That December, both Mary and her sister Elizabeth visited Haworth Parsonage, reconnecting with Anne, their former governess. Charlotte recorded that they were attractive and stylish-looking girls and that they clung to Anne like two children, while Anne remained calm and quietly observant. It must have been a bittersweet moment for Anne. I mean, she's finally seeing the children that she cared for and guided, but now all grown up, embroiled in their own adult lives, yet kind of still seeking her attention and her counsel. Mary's story is a fascinating glimpse into the pressures and the opportunities faced by Victorian women. Even with the constraints of society, she carved out that space for herself, sometimes loudly, sometimes with a touch of mischief, but all whilst maintaining the ties of family and friendship that had meant so much to her during her childhood at Thorp Green. It's hard not to notice this very impressive building standing in the churchyard here at Little Ouseburn. This is the Thompson Mausoleum, built in 1742 by Henry Thompson of nearby Kirby Hall. He died in 1760, and over the next 160 years, generations of his family were laid to rest in the crypt beneath it. It once spoke of wealth and lasting importance, but by the early 1900s, the Thompson family had moved away and Kirby Hall eventually fell into ruin. The hall was demolished in 1920, yet the mausoleum still stands, a quiet and rather haunting reminder of the family's long presence here at Little Ouseburn. I wonder what Anne thought of it when she saw it, and I wonder if she got to see inside. So I've moved location because my legs were getting really cold on the bench, so I've moved so I can stand up for a little bit. But also out of the bag came the trusty old flask of tea. Yes, it's happening again. It's getting to that time of year again when you don't go out without tea. Forget water, it's now tea time. Yep, gone are the days when you were so hot you had to drink water all the time. It's now drinking tea to keep warm. It's not that cold, but it's quite damp, so you kind of feel it in your bones, or at least I do. I'm a wimp, so. But the thing I thought about was being here is that I'm in the very place that Anne spent a lot of time when she was at Thorp Green. I mean, she came here regularly, but also I think she probably this was somewhere where she could come and think through her worries and her problems and her concerns. It's a familiar place, you know, church. She spent a lot of time there with her family back at home in Haworth. So coming here to a church with the routine and all that comes with religion probably gave her that comfort. And I'm also imagining her thinking through all the problems that were happening in Thorp Green at that time, you know, with Branwell and with Mrs. Robinson, and you know, this would have been somewhere where she came, where she could sit there and sort of digest it all, you know, go through it in her brain. And I kind of get this lovely comfort feeling that I'm walking somewhere that Anne walked. And this is not one of these places that's visited much by tourists. It's, you know, it's very much a local church. And so it feels less, this sounds really bizarre, but it feels less diluted. The memory of Anne feels less diluted here than it would be in Haworth, where there are thousands and thousands of people every year going. And I know that doesn't work like that, but yeah, I quite like the idea of maybe sitting in the same pew that Anne sat in, or leaning on the same door frame or gatepost. But it is very beautiful here and very quiet. Even though I say quiet, we've had tractors doing work over the back. The children's school is not far and they've been playing in the playground. There's been a few jet planes going over because there's an RAF base nearby. And they've been doing something called touchdown or something, bump down something, where they fly, kind of nearly landed but not quite, and then take off. So they've been noisy. And there's been the occasional car and things, but it's lovely. Peaceful. And I hope it was peaceful for Anne while she was here. I'm going to take you in a bit round to a location sort of just over the bridge, and we will share a place that we definitely know Anne sat and drew, because we have a sketch that she drew of this church. So I know I will definitely be in her footsteps then. Exciting. Edmund Robinson Jr., known as Ned, was just 14 years old when his father, Reverend Edmund Robinson, died in 1846. At that young age, he inherited the majority of the family estate. I mean, that's a lot of work. Despite his youth, he assumed the responsibility of managing the estate, a task that would have been both challenging and formative. Ned continued to oversee the family property until we think around about 1865, 1866, when Thorp Green was finally sold to a Henry Stevenson Thompson. The sale marked the end of the Robinsons family's direct association with the Hall, and tragically, in February of 1869, Ned's life was cut short in an accident on the River Ouse near Newby Hall. While out with the hunt, the ferry that carried him and several others, plus their horses, capsized. The incident happened when one of the horses became tangled in the chains on the side of the ferry. It panicked, of course, and it unbalanced the ferry and it tipped over. Ned, with other members of the party, drowned in the swollen river. I mean, they were wearing leather boots and heavy tweeds. I mean, he was only in his 30s when he died. The tragic event, known as the Nid Ferry disaster, claimed the lives of 6 men, including some very big landowners in the area. And this had a huge knock-on effect, as you can imagine. The significant impact on the local community and the history of the estates in the area was affected for a long time. In remembrance of this horrid event, a memorial was erected just in Newby Hall. The memorial commemorates those that lost their lives during the Nid Ferry disaster, and it stands as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and that enduring impact of such an event on local history. If you come out the church gate, turn left and cross over Little Ouseburn Bridge, which sits over Ouse Gill Beck. Then follow New Road a little way round. You'll find a bench placed there by the parish council of Little and Great Ouseburn. It marks the very spot where Anne Brontë is believed to have sat and sketched this peaceful view while she lived at Thorp Green. The beck is still there, and so are the sheep in the field. Apart from the occasional passing car and the modern bench, of course, very little has changed. Standing here, it's easy to imagine Anne appearing at any moment, sketchbook and pencils in hand, ready to capture the very same quiet scene I can see today. I often wonder, what sort of day was she having when she drew this view almost 185 years ago? Tractor coming. The plane. Tractor. John Deere. Green and yellow. It's easy to imagine Anne wondering what became of the Robinsons. I mean, the elopements, the remarriages, the tragedies that followed. After their father's death, Elizabeth and Mary suddenly started writing to Anne again, having apparently just stopped for 6 months. Charlotte Brontë reported to Ellen Nussey that the girls flooded Anne with daily letters for a fortnight, crammed with warm protestations of endless esteem and gratitude. They seemed to cling to Anne as if it was that she was their only true friend, and it must have been comforting for her to hear from them again after all this time. Charlotte later reflected that the Robinsons' household had been a dangerous one for Branwell, and that its decline seemed to prove how quickly evil brings its own punishment. Her words, though harsh, just a bit, show how deeply she linked morality and consequences, something Anne may have viewed with more compassion than condemnation. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Anne had stayed on and she was there when Reverend Robinson had died in 1846? I mean, it would have been such a difficult time. She'd known the children for years and she'd guided them and she shared small triumphs and consoling disappointments. But witnessing the household beginning to unravel and the father's passing away would have been really heavy on her heart. Perhaps part of her relief in leaving when she did was that she could quietly step away from all the turmoil and finally sort of close that chapter of her life. The letters from Elizabeth and Mary also show that the daughters were facing their own challenges, of course, engagements that were dictated more by interests or family pressures than love, worries about their futures and coping with a mother whose attentions and affections were now obviously divided. Charlotte wrote that one girl declares that interest alone guides her, while the other is acting according to her mother's wishes and is utterly indifferent herself to the man chosen for her. It's easy to imagine Anne reading these letters and feeling both sort of affection and a little sadness, wishing she could somehow guide them as she had in the past. We don't know if the Robinsons ever contacted the Brontes when Anne herself died in 1849, so it seems those connections had drifted into the past. But for Anne, even that short time of knowing them, guiding, caring for the children, must have left that mark on her. In a quiet way, the Robinson story kind of mirrors that of the Brontes themselves. Moments of hope and promise, shaded by loss and heartbreak, with glimpses of joy along the way. I mean, it reminds us how entwined lives can be and how the echoes of past connections linger long after the letters have stopped arriving. To complaining to one sister had actually misrepresented his wealth and social connections. Could do that bit again because I'm all tongue-tied. Guided them through sharing small triumphs. Just do that last bit again because I went Linda? Who's Linda? Linda Robinson. That's a new one. Looking back, it's remarkable how much the lives of the Robinsons' families were shaped by bold and sometimes controversial decisions. I mean, particularly those of Lydia Robinson. Her remarriage to Sir Edward Scott and her management of her daughters' lives left ripples that affected everyone around her. The daughters especially were caught up in a whirlwind of expectations and pressures and scandal. And it's largely because of their mother's choices that we have records of elopements and engagements and matches that might seem unsuitable to us today. I can't help but wonder, were the daughters trying to secure their mother's attention now that she'd had her sights set on her new, wealthier, entitled husband? Lydia Robinson, or Lady Scott as she was at the end, passed away in June 1859, about 60 years old. Her husband, Sir Edward Scott, had died earlier in December 51, at about the age of 58. They were married for just over 7 years, a relatively short time that nevertheless had a big impact on the family story. So I have my 3 questions for you this week. I don't think you'll be surprised what some of them are, but let me know what you think in the comments below. I love to hear your thoughts. It really is good to read them. So, question number 1. Do you think Lydia's daughters were genuinely pursuing love, or were they mostly acting under family pressures? Number 2, was Mrs. Robinson trying to secure her own position at the expense of her daughters, or just navigating the limited options for widows in Victorian society? And number 3, how do you feel about Anne Bronte's decision to leave Thorp Green when she did? Was it the right choice for her, given everything that followed? Thank you so much for watching today. If you like this video, please do the whole likey, subscribey, hypey thing, because it really does help me out and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Bronte content. Have a good weekend. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you all the Friday after next for more Bronte adventures. See you soon. Bye.